How much dope or coke do you think gets Avon Barksdale into the room? A kilo? 2 kilos? 20 kilos? We are not gonna buy our way up the ladder here. These people do not touch the drugs. They don't go near the drugs. The wire is what gives us Barksdale. It gives us the whole crew. Day by day, piece by piece.
Alex Cottrell and Toby Huntingford present Caught on the Wire. This podcast is an episode-by-episode analysis of HBO's widely acclaimed TV series about the city of Baltimore, its people, and its many problems. Find more information about the show and all the episodes online at caughtonthewire.wordpress.com. Welcome back. It's episode 10 of Caught on the Wire, and we're with the cast this week, and I'm joined, as usual, by Toby Huntingford. Toby, this is a surprisingly kind of action-packed episode. It feels like a big crescendo to me.
Yes, yeah, it waits right to the last moment to really punch you in the gut, but it really shows us that things are coming into the final act now, and that the pressure is kind of really mounting, so it's very, very exciting stuff. Yeah, the
stakes really kind of like get massive, because that's the thing I think with the detail is that we see them face some of the more major realities of what they're getting themselves into.
Definitely.
But anyway, we'll save that for that discussion for the discussion.
Yes, don't bounce straight in as we normally do.
Yeah, let's go for that recap.
Okay, so as we always do, we switch around. It's my turn this week to recap you guys. It's not quite as succinct as last week. I think that episode was a little bit more extensive and all over the place with its strands. I've managed to condense it into 13 areas, so I'll bounce through them. And we start off with Bubbles enjoying the clarity being clean brings him on a park bench. He meets with Waylon, a Narcotics Anonymous sponsor. Waylon gives Bubbles some frank advice to turn back on self-pity and learn to forgive and love himself.
Alright, so a sort of heartwarming opening to what is actually quite a harrowing episode.
Yeah, definitely. Just, a park opposite the church. And the church where he eventually shares at the meetings in Season 5.
Yeah, it is pretty major foreshadowing, isn't it?
Definitely. I mean, he's staring away from it, and there's kind of a pan across with the church out of focus in the background. And it was a nice kind of suggestion that it's not quite part of his life yet, and he's got a long way to go. So. Speaking
of sort of visual parallelism, there's obviously that, maybe not the very opening shot, but obviously when we see Bubbles sat on the bench, there are those kids blowing bubbles, and they're sort of blowing across the screen as he's watching from a distance. It's quite, it's very kind of, what's the word, like on the nose, like.
Yeah.
Very kind of like not very subtle.
It's odd because the first scene we
get is the bubbles and the bubbles and. I mean, it's true. It is quite nice, but it is a heartwarming scene. It does kind of foreshadow quite nicely, so I think it gets away with that rather sort of slightly edging cliche.
Because I think people forget that practically the first scene we see with Bubbles in the show is him blowing bubbles while he's high, and that kind of comes back from. I guess these bubbles are a lot more clear and kind of soapy. I guess because bubbles are essentially soap, aren't they? So I guess it's kind of the I'll get clean idea.
I like the way you kind of you described it as being like the kind of his clarity. I feel like we as the audience are kind of experiencing his clarity there with this. It's almost like a nature documentary, that opening bit. It's just kind of nice shots of the park and people going out and about, and I think clarity is a good way to describe it.
Yeah, babies, dogs, close up of leaves. It's very unusual for The Wire, and it feels quite nice. You almost expect kind of some sort of Attenborough voiceover to pop along at any moment, or a Malick film.
Especially considering that everything that we know about kind of innocence within the city, especially to do with kids and kind of family life, is that it's always kind of showed as being downcast and desperate in some way. And
Yeah.
whereas here, it does adopt that slightly more fairy tale notion of kids playing in the park and mothers pushing prams, and it feels a little bit more traditional in terms of its sort of what the message it's sending.
Absolutely, but he is suddenly yanked back to reality when he spots someone slinging.
Yeah.
And there was also kind of a heavy Snoop Dogg lookalike that
Yeah, I
greets
was
him.
going to say that. I was like, I had paused it there, and I was like, that really looks like Snoop. I don't think it is, though.
Yeah,
I don't think it is.
I've always thought that, and I've wondered, I was wondering why the hell does he look so much like Snoop? And I guess if they're going to bring him back to kind of a reality where he does notice that people are slinging around him, maybe just bring Snoop into the fold. But it's kind of, it's someone that Bubs needs to stay away from. It's clearly an old friend of his. He knows everyone, but he needs to stay away from absolutely every acquaintance he has if he's going to shake these drugs.
Yeah.
And that's a very difficult thing to contemplate. I think that's probably something that he's thinking about at that moment. And all the nice stuff with the kids in the park and the nature is to his right, and to his left is where all the stuff is slinging, and Snoop Dogg walks off to his left as well. So you get this kind of heaven and hell analogy, and obviously with Bubbles we have the whole thin line thing, but we also have the church right in the middle, so there's a really nice kind of sort of big balancing act almost on the tightrope for Bubbles. He's got to make that decision. So
I think it's a very sort of, it's an unusually almost quaint and relaxing start to an episode.
Definitely.
Especially considering where it ends up.
Yeah, that is true. You couldn't have asked for a more disparate opening and closing. Definitely not.
Should we go for number 2? Or...
I think we're missing a couple of things. There was the chat that he has with Waylon. So that is a little bit later on, where he tells him to forgive yourself and love yourself. The other thing I noticed here is that we're spared Bubbles' cold turkey period. We didn't get to see that bit. This is kind of the calm after the storm. And it is nice that he's looking so much better. They really did do something with his makeup, and he's looking that little bit more out of the heroin kind of fold. And there was kind of a certain stillness to the frame here that it's normally quite perhaps a bit jolty and a bit more documentary-like. But it was definitely, they were trying to do everything they could to make it easy for us to empathise with him, with his newfound clarity.
A little bit of slow motion.
So, yeah. I think they talked about Bubbles' nephew, Keyshawn, as well. But I think that was... those were the things that I picked up on. So, any more for you, Alex, or should we do number 2?
I'm ready to move on.
Sweet. Okay, so Avon Barksdale and Stringer Bell meet with Weebay Bryce and tell him to contact Omar Little to negotiate a truce. Stringer convinces Avon to take a step back from the game and insulate himself further from his organisation. Avon gives up his pager so that his subordinates will have to contact him through Stringer.
So this is Stringer sort of getting his truce at long last, although maybe not in the way that he might have liked.
Yeah.
And he kind of makes that statement about having to build a wall around Avon, which obviously I can't see. Avon doesn't seem particularly resistant to the idea because it's already shown that he does have a certain paranoia about him. And in a way, even though Stringer gets his truce, Avon also gets his kind of increased security. So both sides win in a way.
Yeah.
There's kind of a nice. It's almost like getting into a situation that desperate for the pair of them has actually forced the best possible compromise, whereas before there was a lot of conflict of interest between the two, and now it seems resolved, and they're both satisfied by it.
Definitely, you almost get the impression that Stringer is a little bit glad that Omar jumped him, because it did mean that his laid-back approach had to become a lot more palatable, and it did, and as you say, it created that middle ground for them, where Avon was completely understanding of it. You also see how loyal Stringer really is back in the first season, completely building a wall around him and putting everything on the line for Avon. No contact whatsoever with the street. So it's quite an endearing scene for Stringer. You really do get a nice empathy with him, I find. So
yeah, it's a sort of a reinforcing moment for their friendship, especially considering all the kind of rocky stuff before. Otherwise, the story runs the risk of being in a situation where the narrative is just kind of telling the audience that they're friends and that they're sort of brothers rather than actually kind of showing it. But obviously, this is a kind of reinforcement point, and it just continues to go along nicely from there, I think.
Sweet.
But that's quite a short set of scenes,
Yeah.
really, isn't it?
Yeah, the Barksdale doesn't have much to do apart from that this episode. Although we do have our third strand, which is the D'Angelo strand, which is another quite short strand. So, shall I quickly bounce onto that?
Yeah.
D'Angelo Barksdale ignores his girlfriend Donnette as she plans out a home for them and their son. He walks out without giving her the money she's asking for. He waits for his new flame Chardine outside of Orlando's Gentleman's Club, but she refuses to talk to him.
It feels like, in a way, because D'Angelo is so likable, part of me kind of forgot that he is kind of cheating on his girlfriend who he has a baby with.
Yeah.
You kind of don't think about it, but that's a really kind of, for a guy who's normally very aware of the ethics and morals and what is kind of going wrong in his business, that is a rather sort of morally questionable thing that we don't really question as much as an audience. But when I was watching Donnette there and she's kind of like, I want this and I want that, and he just kind of like storms out. I feel like still, in a way, I still kind of felt weirdly on D'Angelo's side. Not really sure why that is, but
Yeah.
I guess
didn't
it's
put as
because
much
Donnette
thought.
has not really been built up much as a kind of personable character. We haven't seen much of her. We don't really know much about her, really. Whereas Chardine, we've been following a lot more, so it's kind of easy for the storytelling of the show to justify the cheating in a way.
Yeah, definitely. It's something that the show does. It's so matter of fact, isn't it? That he's just 1 minute he's cheating and it's never referred to. No one talks about it. It's just kind of an accepted thing.
Yeah, I mean, he just does it. There's never really any kind of question about it. It's not kind of, oh, you have a baby. You know, that never even comes up.
Yeah. Any other show, that would be a
very
major
sly.
point of contention, wouldn't it? Like, it would be, you know, this whole duplicity going on that just doesn't surface here. And you get the sense that D'Angelo really doesn't enjoy this looming family responsibility. Wherever he looks, he finds, you know, tight cars in the fridge or, you know, just more financial burdens for him, more gold digging. But I guess that is the unendearing aspect of D'Angelo, is that he's practically given up on his family, and he appears to have no love for, not his kid potentially. You never see him hold his kid, I don't think, in the whole show.
It feels very detached. I mean, you don't think D'Angelo family man, do you? You don't even really consider about his family until you see him with him, and then you're like, oh yeah, D'Angelo has a kid.
And it's strange, as you might have thought it would be one of his only escapes from the action on the streets, which he's so critical of.
Yeah, that's true.
And as great as a character he is, that there really isn't. There's this big detachment when it comes to his personal life, which is a shame, because that's kind of what he needs if he hates his job so much. He needs the other half of the coin, and he doesn't have that either. And I don't know if it's just him having high expectations, or whether I don't think we know the full story. Is the point, isn't it? I mean, Donnette, as you say, is not a very developed character, so perhaps we don't have.
It's kind of easy to dismiss, I think.
Yeah, but we don't really have all the story there. But it is a kind of tragic to see how much he gives up on his family. So, and then we have the Chardine segment as well.
Is that number 4?
No, this is the other bit of the D'Angelo strand.
Oh, okay, yeah.
Where he basically kind of almost an impulsive attempt to get back with Chardine. So he waits for her outside the club, and it really doesn't go very well. Chardine sort of runs straight off. He even grabs her by the wrist to try and get her to stay. Funnily enough, you see in the foreground people playing checkers, not chess this time.
Yeah.
So perhaps that's suggesting that D'Angelo's playing a weak man's game by trying to get Chardine back so kind of obviously and without much thought. So,
and he even says earlier, you can't play checkers on a chessboard.
Yeah, so
kind of suggests the fact that he is disjointed somewhat from the world that he's in. Another little cue.
Another genius stroke from the Simon.
And there's also that rather unnecessary maybe shot of that stool kind of rolling away.
I've always tried to find a bit of imagery for that, and I can never put it anywhere that means anything.
I mean, it doesn't. Obviously, it doesn't have to mean anything. But I felt like even, not every shot has to be some kind of layered take on some really deep-seated element of the show, trying to send some message through its imagery all the time. It doesn't have to do that, but it just kind of, I just thought it was a bit of a throwaway shot. It's kind of an unusually nonchalant kind of, look,
lingered,
things are
didn't it?
not good because there is a stool rolling. It's feels like a bit of a throwaway.
Yeah, well, I mean, D'Angelo and Stringer in their scene this episode were around those stools because they were kind of sitting up on the bar, facing upwards. But I mean, that I can't really make a link there. So
yeah, that's digging. That's digging pretty hard.
It really
You've got a
is,
diamond
isn't it?
shovel there.
Yeah, it just lingers as a scene, so it kind of draws its attention to itself for not really any gain. So, but yeah, it's good that you picked up on it because I definitely did and tried to find something with it and didn't.
On to next one.
On we go. Now we have the Orlando strand. So Orlando is arrested by narcotics cops when he tries to buy cocaine from an undercover officer, Troy Wiggins. He gives them Avon's name to try and avoid his charge, and the detail gets involved. When Orlando is transferred to county jail, he's identified by Marvin Browning, a Barksdale crew member serving time who was arrested during the raids in episode 3. He phones in Orlando's whereabouts. Levy visits Orlando, but only to take his name off of the club's liquor license, now that he has a record. Avon severs the ties.
I remember when I first watched this scene, and he kind of looks into the bag, and the cops are laughing, because obviously he's just been stung. It wasn't until when you see him again with the cops, and you kind of understand what's happened. I feel like the first time I watched that, it was quite confusing. I just wanted to know what was in the bag.
Yeah.
I felt like that it was a very, very, it wasn't really much of a reveal until much later on, and then it was done really kind of like, and he's with the cops, and you're like, oh, like, I don't know about you, but the first time I watched it, I didn't pick up on that. I thought it was very subtle.
Yeah, they did a good job of being undercover. They looked very legit for the street, didn't they?
And then when it reaches the point in him looking in the bag, I kind of wasn't really sure what it was that they were laughing at.
Yeah.
I felt like I had been stung as well, like...
Dog doo-doo. Yeah, it's true. Yeah, so it's kind of the audience gets screwed over as well.
Maybe it was handcuffs.
Yeah, yeah, that's true, isn't it? Yes, that is true. Yeah, we don't see it. I always assume that he's seeing the product he expects, but with just not knowing that it's about to get him locked up, and that's kind of why the cops are laughing. But yeah, he's
very unlucky to get spotted later on.
Yeah, that is another moment of kind of big coincidence, isn't it? But it was again a nice callback. We talked last week about the Bodie Johnny callback, and this felt like another kind of one of those that was nicely placed just to give minor characters kind of arcs. Like Marvin certainly hasn't quite a nice arc, even though we see him twice. Like he has a role to play in season 1, which is kind of cool.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean. The cops played it well. They played nervous very well as well, didn't they? Like you really got the sense that this was like a rookie kind of criminal who was really, really shifty about dealing drugs, and he must have been new on the job or something. But it was a complete farce because he was a cop all along. So
you got to be able to act if you're a policeman, it seems, or if you're a detective, anyway.
Yeah, it's all part of the package, and it was quite funny because Orlando. I always enjoys Orlando's tunes as he turns up in that kind of 70s sedan with his upbeat jazz and like all the rolling up in this old kind of Starsky and Hutch style movie. And I just thought that came across as quite funnily, kind of humorously ironic because he's essentially parking up at his own unintentional arrest, and he's giving himself this massive kind of entrance with this big jazz solo and this epic kind of like 70s American sedan. So it was
and also it just hammers home the fact that he is a guy who owns a strip club.
Yeah.
Like he's not quite a pimp, but he's kind of essentially pretty close. So here is a sort of outlandish car and sort of slightly loud shirt and big hair and some like funk and soul or something.
Definitely. I mean, maybe he was kind of. My theory on Orlando is I think he's a fairly weak character and he's kind of silly, but you get the sense that he was kind of lured in.
Is what he is.
Yeah,
he's
definitely.
a massive tool.
He was lured into the Avon dream, and was perhaps kind of too eager for his own piece. So he was perhaps the king of swag before Avon came and bought his place out, and he probably feels a bit like a doormat. So despite his name being on the front, he kind of wants to break out his own piece of the game. And that might have been a nice motivation for what he does here. And if they would have explored something like that in the show, it would have been great. It would have deepened Orlando a little bit. But you still get the sense that he's just a silly, silly man. Like, what's he doing? Like, what's he asking for right here? I mean, he's Avon's clean front. What the fuck?
I mean, it's kind of suggested that it's been that way for a little while. I mean, if he'd just like established the front and then saw the operation that was going on, was like, oh, I want a piece of that, it would make a bit more sense. But it's almost like he doesn't know Avon, and it's like you can't possibly think this is a good idea, especially when he goes to Avon's nephew with the information. He totally gives it away. Yeah, so he really does not kind of think very hard. Orlando he is, like you say, the kind of the silly character.
Definitely, he's got the hair to match as well. So, although funny bit of HBO trivia there. Orlando and Troy, who's the undercover cop, they're like two of the bigger characters in the corner, so they're kind of crossing paths in this scene. And Troy's like a corner kid in the corner, so he does very well. So it's a nice little David
Interesting
Simon
that the
cameo.
actor didn't get a bigger role.
Yeah, I thought that as well. It's literally just a little one episode cameo, really.
And then it's also suggested later on that he knew Kima from way back when.
Yeah, apparently he was the guy who turned her gay. So
Well, supposedly.
yeah, it's clearly just a bit of banter, I imagine, but
Baltimore
nice to have a bit of
Bants.
history. Yeah.
Bantimore.
Yeah, Bantamore, it works. It works, sir. Great to see Levy again. We haven't seen him in a while. Not since he was helping Bodhi out of the juvenile facility.
Yeah.
Typically pragmatic, pushing Orlando over in a second. Silly Orlando again. He's out of there as fast as he possibly can. Now you're in the game. I don't think there's a better way to teach Orlando a lesson there. So
I love Levy. Such a good character. He's so kind of deliciously evil.
Yeah, beautiful. I mean, he didn't spend any more time than he needed to in that room. Like, he just forced a signature out of him, and he was gone. He was on to his next client. He's just the ultimate evil lawyer. Just doesn't give a shit. But
he's kind of like the Wire's equivalent of a sort of mustache twirling villain.
Yeah,
because he has that kind of like suave resourcefulness, kind of always in a suit, really kind of business-like and matter-of-fact, and really cold. Totally in it for just the gains.
Definitely. He's a fantastic character.
Yeah, I love Levy.
top 10 easily. Right, I think that concludes the Orlando bit so far. I think there's a little bit more Orlando later with detail.
Yeah.
Right. So, Detective Jimmy Mcnulty visits Judge Phelan's office, and it seems the judge has lost his stomach for the investigation. After the meeting, Rhonda Perlman tells Mcnulty that Phelan is off of the mayor's re-election ticket. So we have the little Phelan strand.
Yeah, it's kind of, we touch base with Phelan and Jimmy every other episode, don't we?
Yeah, and Phelan occasionally goes a bit bipolar and jittery, as he does here, normally when Rhonda's around.
Yeah.
So,
I don't know, I just kind of find all these scenes a little bit awkward in a way, like, I don't really know what to make of them sometimes. There's that strange one from earlier on, from about 2 episodes ago as well, isn't there?
Yeah, I think it was a desperate attempt to give Phelan some kind of, off the wall characterization. It was a bit weird, and it's weird again. He's clearly just got the hots for Rhonda and doesn't really know how to kind of display it. So he just kind of completely chastises McNulty for no apparent reason.
But it does feel like kind of, although we're looking at with the judge kind of signing, some affidavit or whatever and agreeing to extending the wiretaps, or this is what he thinks about the case, it does feel like the actual nature of the scene is just totally rooted around the fact that, he fancies Rhonda, so now he's going to be a bit silly. Yeah. And it's kind of like the whole scene is it's anchored around that more than the case. And that's fair enough. Not everything has to be about the detail and about the case, but I don't really feel like it's a particularly interesting strain to be anchoring a scene on, especially when we're picking up on it every other week and just having these little scenes, and they start to feel a little bit obligatory rather than enjoyable.
Yeah. Have you noticed they're quite catchphrasy as well? They're like it's all about one-liners, so it's all, I've never been anything other than ladylike, Your Honor. And then there's there's
a very kind of like YouTube clip-esque element to them. Right?
as after the judge, I agree with what the judge. Is that another one? I agree with what the judge thinks. And there's I hold you in contempt. Who doesn't? It's kind of classic Mcnulty, characterization kind of lines. So it's all a bit kind of.
Someone should take those scenes and put a laugh track on them.
it would work in those.
But like a sort of Happy Days kind of over the top, like drum fill after the real zinger at the end.
Yeah, it's just strange. I completely agree that they'd work in that context. It's like the Breaking Bad sitcom version. That would be the scene they use for the Wire version. If again, we make lots of kind of offhand references to other internet media, but just go and type in Breaking Bad sitcom to YouTube if you haven't seen it. It's very funny.
Yeah, that is brilliant. That is very good.
Definitely. I guess more seriously, the scene wants to show us how even the judge, who we thought perhaps was immune to bureaucratic pressure because he was a judge at the top of the chain, is now on the verge of losing his judge's seat because of Mcnulty, but also because the judge was so keen to help him in the first place. So we see that the bureaucratic pressure goes beyond the judge. There's people he has to answer to as well.
And it's all about money.
Yep, and that's why it's always going to fall. So I guess that's what we kind of learned from the scene, beyond all the banter. Was it Bantermore? There we go. Beyond all the Bantermore.
Yeah, there's all these nice little bits throughout season 1 that touch a little bit on the politics that we see later on. Especially sort of season 3 and beyond, we start touching all that stuff to do with tickets and donations and councilmen and all these sort of things. Like we kind of like touch on that later on, but we do get. I feel like this is one of the examples of why season 1 is almost like an entree to the 4 other seasons, because it provides these little smatterings of everything that you get later on. Because it's just so generally about the drug war that you just kind of get a little bits of everything. And then you have the 4 seasons that follow that are more specific.
Yeah, definitely. I can't argue with that.
Would you like to move on to the next one?
Yeah. Right, okay, so let's go over to the detail offices, where Lester Freeman has mapped the Barksdale stash to a payphone in Pimlico. Every time a resupply is needed, they page the same number, and the return call comes from the same payphone. Ellis Carver and Leander Sidner are the only detectives available for surveillance of the phone, as Herc is on a training course for the week. Carver works the night shift at the Mondo Mart. Sidner takes over for the second half of the night and into the morning. Detective Santangelo identifies Little Man using the tower phone, and Sidner soon finds the respondent at his phone. Freeman instructs Sidner to follow the resupply man, and he tracks him to a suburban house. Later at the office, Freeman organises Sidner and Roland Prez to surveil the house as garbage men. So that's our investigation strand. A lot of development here.
For some reason, that last bit is the bit that I always remember from that bit is, Prez just climbing off a dustbin lorry with his gloves on. He doesn't look out of place, actually.
No, he does have the look of a garbage man, if that's possible. That's a horrible thing to say, but it works.
It's just the way they kind of like saunter off. You have the kind of, it pulls up and then they just kind of drop off and pick up the bags. It feels like almost like there's something strangely cinematic about it. I feel like they're about to do some Ocean's 11 kind of thing. But that's the bit I always remember from that strain.
Yeah, no, definitely.
But then there's also Carver's messiness and all of his snacks and everything. I feel like that's mentioned later on. Isn't it mentioned later on about something to do with Carver no longer being on rip and runs and him like getting fat or something like that?
Well, it's certainly mentioned as far as the fact that he does gain weight, particularly season 5. I think you can see it piling on in season 4. But yeah, by season 5, he's certainly quite a bit bigger. I mean, you wouldn't call him fat, but he's certainly sized out, and perhaps this is a nice foreshadowing of that with all his crab chips and the rest of it.
Can't imagine how dull that must be.
Yeah,
just sat there watching a phone. I mean, we just see the interesting bits.
Yeah, it's 12-hour shifts, isn't it? Because Herc wasn't there, they had to split it from 8 hours into 12 hours. So it must be, unbelievably grueling, really. Sounds like easy work on paper, but it must be some of the hardest work possible, really. As far as, President Sidner on bin duty. That sounds a little bit more interesting. But yeah, it's long, arduous stuff. I think it's just quite impressive that the detailer finally listened to enough calls to hear them speaking to the resupply. I mean, we didn't hear a lot of that, but we know that they've been listening to enough call links that they've finally found the man at the top of the chain, this guy out in the suburbs who, not just the re-up, but the resupply, as Freeman calls it, like, you know, where all their shit comes from. The stuff that comes down from New York, I assume, sits in that house. So it's nice that they've kind of got to the top of their mountain, which is a bit of a Freeman phrase. And we also get some excellent policing choices from Mcnulty, who goes to see Wallace after hearing it on the sex phone the last episode. I mean, it's a great thing to do because he knows that he's certainly at least empathetic and was torn up by the stick-up crew. So we see Mcnulty making some good choices here.
Yeah, it's the amount of work is somewhat justified by that big board they have with all the little bits of string pointing everywhere, and Freeman comments on Prez's ability to do the paperwork, basically.
You have a gift for the paper trail. Yeah.
So yeah, it's, like you say, it is suggested that they've done a lot of work, and this is kind of the payoff.
Yeah. Same with Bubbles, I guess, who we didn't see as cold turkey, but we saw him on the other side. So
yeah, kind of like just snipping out the bits that perhaps don't make particularly good TV.
Yeah, that's true.
But other than that, I thought like the rest of that strain was pretty kind of just going through the motions, establishing what it is that they've achieved,
procedural,
and then what they do
work
with that opportunity.
Yeah.
So that was slightly more procedural, maybe that bit.
Right. Let's go on for Strand 7. So Daniels and Perlman meet with Kima Greggs and Mcnulty to discuss the use of Orlando. Daniels suggests they could use him in a buy bust to move up the ladder. In a meeting with Deputy Commissioner Burrell and Forster, Major Forster, Daniels makes a case for waiting, but Burrell insists they make a buy bust.
So Burrell still won't see sense. He's very stubborn about these things that just don't work. But I guess it's highlighting the fact that when they're at the top, they just don't seem to be able to see down. They don't seem to be able to kind of see the actual on the street impact that doing all of these buy busts and everything has. So, again, we're just treated to another scene where Daniels is kind of desperately trying to explain why it's not a very good idea, and Forster shrugging and not offering any kind of resistance whatsoever. Yeah,
it's ridiculous, isn't it? It's one of many scenes we have with Daniels versus Burrell, and this one is perhaps the most important because if Burrell did listen to Daniels, I mean, we wouldn't be having a police shot. There's a lot of factors that lead up to it, but that's certainly a big one. So, this is a serious mistake from Burrell, especially after everything they've done so far. I mean, Daniels must be presenting him with files of information of all this stuff that they've learned and all of the progress that they've made, and either he's not reading it or he's, willfully ignorant of it. Definitely. It's very, very frustrating stuff. Very tragic, really. But it kind of makes Burrell interesting as a character, I think, in a way. Like, he's not... he is kind of stubborn in that way, but he's not totally two-dimensional. I feel like he doesn't... Yeah, I mean, you totally see that he is that way, and that's why he's so good at his job, and you can totally understand why he does that. Yeah, I mean, it makes it very clear why he's been appointed to that position and why he's so good at staying there. Because he just plays the caution card in every situation. Yeah, he knows what's going to make the people that actually make the decisions above him, and obviously that's what he cares about. That he knows what makes them happy, and he knows how to dish it out to people below. And the impact, he knows that the actual impact very rarely touches him, so... You've already seen before, especially when he's at the party with Daniels, that he knows all of the political faces. He knows how to kind of play the game. So he's not going to be caught out there, even if his decisions are stupid. It almost doesn't matter. Yeah. He almost just doesn't... In a way, a lot of those higher level characters don't even feel like they're even in the police. They just feel like just big, bad people. It's kind of difficult to even be like, yeah, that person's a police officer. Like, yeah, definitely. And I guess these people are also having to do what the street thugs do, whereby they have to find ways of saying that things aren't on them, or maybe they don't think about them at all. They're too kind of desensitized to it. But there must have been a part of Burrell that thought, Kima's shooting kind of went down behind what he what he stipulated, what he arranged at the top, and it's all very, very interconnected and kind of crazy for Burrell. What all the stress that he has to deal with.
There is also a parallel between the people at the top of the police and the people at the top of the drug game reacting with that kind of like all points bulletin kind of, we need to get this person, we need to make a statement, we need to tell them who we are. We see both sides doing that, especially after this episode.
Yeah.
But we've already seen it earlier as well, where they go down kicking down doors across the pit. And then, of course, there's Avon putting the hit out on Omar, and it's obviously a very common theme amongst the upper echelons of both sides, is that they just want to make a statement. They want to make sure that even if they are in a position of weakness, that they're deploying enough assets to make it seem like they have a lot of strength behind them.
Yeah.
Kind of brute force at the top of the game.
They're as weak as they're perceived, I guess, aren't they? That's kind of how you measure it.
Yeah.
So
I guess it comes down to that line where it's like Burrell says to Daniels, and again from another showdown between the two, Burrell's like, we need to tell them who we are, and Daniels says, and who are we exactly? Yeah. Which I think that's a really good line.
Yeah, and then he throws that back in his face again with you'd rather let the world. You'd rather live in shit than let the world see you work a shovel. That was it, wasn't it? Which is kind of the whole perception of weakness thing coming straight to him.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's a fantastic trump card from Daniels when we get to that. Again, we're episode jumping, but it's great, the Burrell-Daniels dynamic in season 1. I guess that's what we're getting at.
And the next one, then.
Let's go again. Okay. Bloody hell. Right, number 8. Let's go to Wallace. So after working out that Wallace is tapping power from a vacant apartment, Mcnulty bribes Officer Bobby Brown, who's another corner alumni, and his partner with a crate of beer to wait on him at home. Greggs pages Mcnulty and he goes to meet with Greggs. Omar has contacted her and needs care for his shoulder wound. Once Wallace is brought in, Mcnulty finds him ready to talk. He gives up Stringer Weebay and several other Tower soldiers in Brandon's murder. Daniel sits in on Wallace's interrogation. Afterwards, Perlman discusses where Wallace can go until they need him for the trial. They decide he would be best placed with his grandmother on the Eastern Shore, as there are no funds for protective custody. Later, Daniels drives Wallace to his new home and notices that he is in withdrawal.
So this is another example of having the kind of procedural bit cut out, where we don't see Mcnulty actually talking to Wallace. We don't see Wallace kind of giving up these names or anything. We just get to the bit where Greggs arrives and Mcnulty is basically saying, yeah, I got all this information, he was ready to talk. So it's kind of another example of that bit being cut out, possibly for the best.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. I guess all we see when Mcnulty goes to the apartment is there's like a rotting dinosaur toy and just empty juice boxes. And that's kind of all we need to know that Wallace has long gone, given up on looking after the kids. And we now know that there are kind of more Wallaces running around free, avoiding social services. So I guess Mcnulty kind of glances up symbolically at that wire once he steps outside, just to see how trapped Wallace is.
And there's a nice little bit where Wallace arrives at the just after obviously Daniels has taken him to his grandmother's house, and he's talking about, what's that noise, and it's the crickets.
Yeah. Beautiful bit of kind of social exclusion kind of exploration there, definitely. It's a nice kind of change of perception. This guy's never left the ghetto practically, really, is he? So it's nice to see that. We have 2 more stakeouts as well to add to Carver's crab-fueled stakeout. We have a second crab-fueled stakeout with beers and crab cakes. Yeah. Have no fear. This is Mcnulty, and Mcnulty has the pride to say that line. So
Mrs. Mcnulty raised no fools.
That's it. That's the one. Yeah, you got it. And I mean, after 12 beers each, would they be able to spot Wallace, let alone bring him in?
I know that's a lot of beer, isn't it?
Because he had 24 Dutch beers, Heineken's. So, but that's how Mcnulty does. If you've been on Jameson all your life, you don't really need, you need a lot of beer to get you going.
What's 24 beers,
Exactly. It's just a day on the job for him. And then we have the third stakeout, which is Mcnulty on his late night one, where he's just kind of sprawled out on that chair. Like he was too drunk to drive home. With Wallace, he's just been with Wallace all night, really, I think. And he's given up everything about the stick-up, including Stringer. Everything but D'Angelo, which is quite noble of him. So
yeah, we do see that. Wallace is obviously not prepared to give up D because he's done right by him.
Yeah.
I was also going to say that I thought it was a bit of a shame that when Mcnulty was sleeping that they didn't go for the tie.
Yeah. I
was like, what happened to the rule? Maybe being drunk doesn't count. Maybe that's one of the kind of like, supplementary bits.
That is true. They clearly hadn't established the necktie mausoleum yet, had they? That was kind of a season 4 thing, I think, when that finally got its way into the show. But yeah, it's a great kind of bit of culture in the police department, which is of course all true as well from all the stories we hear from Ed Burns and whatnot, who was on the force.
From the various literature that kind of precedes the show.
Yeah, definitely. We see that D'Angelo's not good at hiding the fact that he won't give up D'Angelo, but he still refuses to give up D'Angelo. And you also see some chemistry between Rhonda and Daniels. They're clearly still kind of setting up this relationship. It's fairly obvious when they're talking about the hotel. There's this kind of look on Daniels' face as he kind of stares at Rhonda in this slightly more fanciful way.
Trying to get her involved. He wants to see more of her.
Yeah.
But she's not really up for it. She's all business at the time. And he kind of seems a bit dejected by that.
Yeah, and it's probably clear that he's not. If he's a passionate man, I'm sure Daniels is as passionate as the next man. There's not a lot going on with his relationship. It's an incredibly steely political kind of affair, isn't it, with him and Marla? So he might potentially already be looking for the out.
There is that nice moment from the earlier episode with him and Marla where he's talking about the kid getting blinded.
Yeah.
I think it's the bit. I think I mentioned it before where he was like that old man up late and he was kind of sat there in his dressing gown with his whiskey and she comes down. They have a little moment there.
Yeah.
But yeah, generally speaking, their relationship seems pretty loveless.
Definitely,
and it just gets
terrorists.
worse, really.
Yeah, it's just not fun. And that we see another relationship. I mean, that's the Kima Cheryl kind of divide, but we'll come to that in a little bit. Any more on the Wallace line? I think we do see Clayton Davis finally open his mouth in the Wallace strand as well, because Wallace is watching him on telly, with some classic Clay Davis passion as he gives off his political musings and the rest of it.
Another foreshadowing for later on, season 5, where he's kind of giving his rousing defense against himself. It's we see a couple of scenes very much like that.
I think it's on those same steps actually as well, on that City Hall steps that we see him. So yeah, it all kind of comes full circle. Yeah.
But yeah, I think that's about it.
Yeah. Right. Okay, number 9. Mcnulty discovers that his estranged wife Elena has organised an emergency hearing to limit his visitation rights. The judge dismisses the suggestion and asks them to deal with the problem themselves. Mcnulty tries to convince Elena that he loves his family. Elena reminds him that she has photographs of him meeting with Pullman.
Yeah, this is obviously another really short section. I like the judge in this scene. I think she kind of makes an interesting call about these kind of civil suits. Right, I do kind of like you see from the point of view of the judges where they just kind of have to sit down and listen to the problems of the families, and she's basically like, "Are you able to actually have a civil conversation with one another? And if so, please try and deal with it yourselves."
Yeah,
does seem to be kind of making a certain comment on the fact that so many of these suits and problems could be resolved if people could just sit down and actually kind of come to some kind of compromise without being so, vapidly territorial all the time.
Definitely. It was kind of painful to watch. Even more painful to see that Pullman was kind of the defence. It's just a very awkward situation for him. She's the one defending Mcnulty's marriage, whilst it's clear they themselves are kind of in sexual relations. That Elena's not blind to it. And as you say, great that the judge dismissed the case. It didn't need to be dealt with in that situation, and But, as I always say, I defend Elena. You can kind of see why she'd arranged the court hearing after the stuff with Omar and the market. You know, she feels Mcnulty's a real threat.
I think this is another case of when I first watched it, and obviously I was quite a bit younger. I think I must have been 18 or 19 when I first watched it. And I remember first watching it, and it's easy to side with Mcnulty, but then the more you watch it, and especially if you watch it when you're older, you do kind of see the fact that Elena, like you say, is right, and she has every reason to not trust him. Especially when he brings in this woman that she knows he's had an affair with into the courtroom with him as his lawyer. I mean, it's just so inappropriate.
Sleazy.
Like, everything about it is inappropriate.
I fucking need a fucking lawyer. Yeah. Well,
Mcnulty.
Yeah. And she has pics, what? She dedicates a lot of time to cracking him down, so...
Yeah, she's an own little detective in her own right.
Yeah, perhaps it just speaks to how scared she is of him. Like, I mean, if you hear these stories about Omar and the market with Stringer, like, it would bloody scare you if you're a mother. Like, so, it shows you how much she is desperate to kind of take Mcnulty out of her life.
I don't feel very convinced when Mcnulty tells her that he loves her. I find it very unconvincing. Yeah. I mean, he's just saying it to try and get something back. I feel. I mean, we don't really see a whole lot of their relationship, really. So it's hard to know. But yeah, I wasn't really convinced by that.
Yeah, I mean, she seems half convinced by it, which is odd. She still sees behind his lie that he's still sleeping with Rhonda, but she almost admits defeat. Like, she's like, I'm really scared of you, and I kind of want you locked up for what you're doing to my kids, but you still love me apparently, so we'll be civil about it, and I'll just go on with my life. So it was, it was odd. She kind of bought it a lot more than I think the audience does. So
yeah, very kind of very notable amount of contrition being shown.
Yeah,
to be applauded to some extent. I think it would be very easy for anyone to be somewhat hysterical about what Jimmy's been doing. Especially, I mean, the thing with the front and follow is just unbelievable, really.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, from a story plotting perspective, it's also great, this scene, because it means that those scenes where Mcnulty is parenting aren't just there to build up Mcnulty's character. They're there to also build up to this scene, where the parenting culminates in this courtroom trial sort of thing, and just very competent story arcing that everything kind of has a multi-purpose. It tells us about Mcnulty, but it also builds up to something else, some other storyline. So, really, really nice stuff.
All the pieces matter.
Absolutely, and that for me is why The Wire is just so great. You can kind of see how it all fits together, and something like The Sopranos has all the great characters and the dialogue, but it doesn't have that plotting to any extent whatsoever, and that's kind of why I really, really like about The Wire. So, yeah,
duly noted. On to the next one.
Right, number 9. Number 10 now. We're getting close to the end. Kima goes out drinking with Cheryl, and the two try to match each other. It seems Cheryl has as strong a stomach as Kima. One of their friends asks how Kima knew she wanted to be a cop, and she tells the story of an adrenaline-fueled arrest. Cheryl looks uncomfortable throughout, but when Kima acknowledges her misgivings, the two kiss.
This is obviously our epigraph scene. This is another example of all the signs are there in this episode for something to happen to Kima. Like, all the signs are there. And we kind of have this scene with her being very relaxed and being very candid and, drinking and out with her girlfriend, and they're having a good time, and they're sort of reconciling an element of their relationship. And you really feel like, especially after the scene where she gets shot, I kind of felt like, I really should have seen this coming a little bit more. I mean, obviously watching it for the 6th time or whatever, I knew it was happening, but it still feels shocking. It still feels like a surprise. It's kind of interesting how The Wire still puts in all these little cues that we're going to build up a character and make them really happy, and then we're going to just destroy them again. I just felt like I should have seen it coming, but it still manages to sneak it past you.
Yeah, that was about it. And that it's kind of almost not foreshadowing, but it's more just kind of almost almost eulogizing, perhaps. Not she's not going to die, but it's kind of an end of an era for her, as far as her relationship goes.
Yeah.
And they're just kind of almost cementing that with this scene. So it's kind of sad, really.
A 2-in-1 in terms of the
yeah.
knocking up and breaking down. There's kind of the kind of the sudden, more shocking one with Kima getting shot, and then there's the more drawn out death of their relationship.
Yeah. And you see that Kima's proud to be locking up people that matter. And that's kind of why she's drawn towards policing. Quite fairly noble. She loves the satisfaction of getting people behind the handcuffs, and always appreciate a domestic scene, as we say there. I mean, they come of few and far between in The Wire, so always nice to see them. And then we have a lovely transition as well with the Barksdales having I think their kind of rum and coke or something that Chardine brings straight after we get the Gregs taking shots. So you get the evening entertainment transition out of the way. So, yeah. Anything more you got to say on Kima, or?
I'll be saving a few things for the epigraph, so.
Yeah. Okay, cool. Right, should we go? We've got 3 left now. So, Omar meets with Stringer under Proposition Joe's supervision. They discuss a truce, and despite Omar wearing a wire, the detectives come away with little new information. Bell does not deny a link to Brandon's murder, but is quick to shield Avon's name from the discussion. Omar asks for $5,000 for a retirement fund. Weebay, Avon, and Stringer discuss the meeting later, and Chardine tries to listen in with little success. She reports into Freeman and tells him that she finds it hard to see without her glasses on stage. They joke about her ugly spectacles.
So it's interesting. Obviously, we get to see Prop Joe again, which is always nice. And he feels. You were mentioning before that they feel like they hadn't quite got his character down yet. He was still kind of just a little bit of a generic street sort of Don.
Yeah.
But I feel like he's already a little bit more established in the scene. Feels a lot more like the Prop Joe that we know.
Yeah.
And as he quite brazenly pretends to not to know Omar, which is. Again, it's a very nonchalant little point made by the show. That he just kind of introduces himself, but then again, you're like, hang on a minute, they do know each other. And obviously next to Stringer, so it's pretty, it's quite a nice little bit there.
Yeah.
And then Stringer is remarkably careful with his words, is it Mcnulty that says, how careful is Stringer?
I think it's Greg's, actually. Oh, no, Mcnulty says that, and then Greg says, I don't know, no way. Yeah, so it's kind of both of them. So my memory is freakishly accurate, isn't it? Scary. But yeah, so that they both realise. And yeah, I mean, it's ridiculous. I mean, Stringer is happy to put himself up for a murder. Well, not necessarily put himself up, but he's happy to kind of air it in the public. But anything to do with Avon, instant brick wall, as he said earlier. Like there's nothing that I'm going to be, releasing there. So it's severe loyalty, severe
true
loyalty.
to his word.
Yeah.
And then there's the nice little bit later on you mentioned with Chardine and Freeman, again, kind of foreshadowing what's to come for the two of them. And they have quite a tender moment together, almost. Yeah,
definitely, with those big 80s glasses, funny 80s frames that came out of nowhere.
I guess it's also showing the fact that, she's not exactly making loads of money at this club. She's surviving on tips and drinks, and she's not able to, get any fancy glasses. They're obviously just, some cheap, horrible prescription glasses or something.
Yeah, even in today's hipster kind of culture of 2014, they wouldn't quite cut the bill. They're a little bit too granny-ish to really quite work, aren't they? So they're kind of, very uncool glasses that, you say, kind of, she had to scrimp and save to find, probably.
Nice big dinner plates.
Yeah, definitely. My mum had a pair of those when I was 2, so they're very, very similar stuff. Quickly going back to that scene with Stringer and Prop Joe, I was trying to kind of look for cool little cues. But you noticed that when the camera was on Stringer, there was a McDonald's in the background. But when it was on Omar, there was kind of an independent bar restaurant in the background, which I thought was a really nice, perhaps capitalism versus lone wolf independence sort of statement they were going for, maybe.
Oh, right. I did see the McDonald's, but I didn't really kind of pick up on that kind of imagery. That's interesting.
Yeah, definitely check it out. I thought it was a nice little. Perhaps it was completely kind of intentional. Should have been very nice.
That's another extremely subtle bit of product placement from The Wire.
The Mackies really stands out. Like there's no way of hiding it.
Hey, they got to fund their terrible CGI budget somehow.
I don't know. I really like the product placement in The Wire because it makes it feel grounded in our world. Like you do need some of it for it to really kind of feel real. And if you stood right in the middle of Baltimore, what are you likely to see? You're likely to see a Mackey's.
Yeah.
So, yep.
Feels like a bit of Baltimore we're not really that familiar with as well. That
Yeah.
kind of plaza with the high street and everything. It feels like a almost alien part of Baltimore, especially for those characters. I mean, Omar looks almost completely out of place.
Yeah, it is the only time we'll go to that. Is it the Inner Harbour, the central part of Baltimore?
Yeah.
And I think we go there once more with to Chris Ruth's Steakhouse with the kids in season 4. But I think that's about it.
Yeah, I
mean,
vaguely remember that. Yeah.
Yeah. Otherwise, we stick to the suburbs and those inner cities. So the projects, yo.
On to the next one.
Yeah. Right, so this is kind of two symmetrical strands that I've just bundled together. So Omar does not believe the truce is for real and boards a bus to New York. Mcnulty sees him off and asks him to keep in touch. And Bubbles meets with Greggs and asks for her help getting a place to stay clean. She agrees to give him some money the following day. So we have two kind of send-offs here with our favourite coppers and our favourite street characters.
Yeah, I mean, I honestly don't have loads to say about this bit, other than just, there's kind of these send-off moments kind of being waved away and Omar on the bus. That's about it. But I don't really kind of have a lot to say about these bits.
No, I mean, there wasn't a lot. I mean, Kima just called over. It's one of the last times that the two kind of see each other on a personal level. I do think they drift apart a bit kind of later on in the later seasons. It becomes strictly professional, kind of a CI relationship. And you perhaps get the sense that it was because he did take the money off her, but he doesn't stay clean. Like, he quickly goes back to being a junkie. And there's perhaps a little guilty part of her that wants him to stay a fiend, so she's got her line into the ghetto.
Oh, yeah, she does say, what good is a clean informant?
Oh, that is true, yeah. So
I guess it demonstrates that although there may be a little bit of personality between the two, ultimately he is a bit of a kind of just a tool for her, really.
Yeah. Yeah, as sad as it sounds, he is such an asset though. So like Kima has the ultimate kind of gloating rights with Bubbles under her sleeve, like helping her out with all the criminal stuff.
And he's so clued in with everything that goes on the street and with the game and everything. I mean, she couldn't ask for a better CI, really.
Yeah, he's just an intelligent lad who just woke up on the wrong side of the tracks, really, didn't he? So, he's the ultimate CI, and we love him for it. And there's that bit when he goes, "I'll pay you tomorrow," and he's like, "Tomorrow?" It's like this much quivering, fiery, kind of fearful tomorrow. Another night of fighting temptation.
Yeah.
And I think you see that later on with isn't there that bit where you see Omar in the night and he there's kind of this hellish fire going on and there's someone who asks him if he wants some death row. He's like, "I'm not up, yo. I'm not up." So
yeah, that's kind of very telling, isn't it?
It's a gorgeous bit of imagery.
He's not gonna kill himself for that.
Yeah.
Right, on to the next one.
Our final stop.
This is the last one, is it? Okay.
This is the meaty one. So, with no other option, Daniels organises a buy-bust. Greggs is to be the undercover officer in the car, and she tapes a gun to the underside of the back seat in Orlando's car in preparation. Savino meets with Orlando, and they drive to another location. Kima sits in the back. She tries to give their location over a concealed radio, but Savino seems suspicious and turns up the radio, and the detail loses track of the car. So Savino brings the product. Kima is unsure of their location because the street signs have been moved around. Deliberate act by the local hood to confuse the police. Kima becomes suspicious when she believes she sees a couple of moving shadows nearby, and then two men in hoodies kind of move toward the car, and Orlando is shot. Is that Weebay and Little Man, isn't it? Those two. So Kima tries to reach for a gun, cannot find it because it's slipped out of her hand right beneath the seat, and her signal disappears before the detail can find her. And when they eventually find the vehicle, Orlando is dead and Kima is severely wounded with gunshots to the neck and chest.
So this is maybe, off the top of my head, maybe the best action scene in the whole of The Wire.
Yeah.
I mean, it is one of the most intense scenes that I've ever seen on TV. I mean, it's so gripping. Even when you've seen it several times, it just never ceases to just really pin you down and make you wonder what's going to happen, even if you know.
Definitely. It's there's not a lot of action in it, but there's a lot of kind of frantic searching, which kind of that's almost more powerful than the action itself, isn't it? It's just this idea of so much kind of distraught and everyone's kind of going crazy. Yeah, it's very, very intense.
I guess it depends what you mean by action. I mean, if you
Yeah.
define action as people shooting at one another, then yeah, there's obviously not loads of that. But there is there is the whole motion of the scene, the motion of the camera, the characters themselves are very frenetic and desperate, and kind of. I mean, that for me is especially as far as The Wire is concerned, that is definitely action.
Yeah, it's hard to argue with that.
There is a little bit. I thought it was kind of cool as Savino turning the radio up and kind of shows a little bit of smarts on his part. But I thought there was a little bit of a continuity error where he kind of turns the music up and then he turns it up even more. And it kind of reaches the point where they have to kind of like shout out to one another to speak. But then when he asks Orlando to pull in, he says it really quietly and you can hear him.
Oh, okay.
He's like, yo, pull in there. And it's like, hang on, I thought the music was really loud. How can Orlando hear him?
Did he signal as well, like with a finger or something, or was it?
But it was like the fact that the actual audio mix itself, he said it, and it was like really, it was quiet, but you could hear him really clearly.
Oh, right.
It kind
so
of just felt a bit out of place because it was like 1 minute they were sort of having to call over to one another and the music being loud, and then suddenly it was almost as if it wasn't anything. Kind of just a minor continuity error. I know that's a little bit picky.
No,
but
some eagle ears you've got there, definitely. But yeah, no, it's quite a catch. But yeah, as you say, Safino was great to get straight on the case. Like you want these guys to seem as smart as everyone else, and they certainly nailed that. And,
something about stupid criminals and stupid cops, I think.
That's it. That's a Mcnulty line, isn't it? Technically,
it is. Yeah.
Yeah. So we instantly from the off, as soon as Savino gets in the car, we can tell the tension is rising rapidly, with Savino already kind of busting their plan from the start, and it's one of the few times where the music really, really helps kind of lace the tension up, because the beat I thought was kind of really kind of quite alarming and very kind of tense. So, because normally they try and use music to just either add a bit of ambience to a scene or to kind of throw you off the scene. Like for example, with that the Lion Sleeps Tonight in the shopping mall scene, where they try and use that to kind of subvert the action. This time it really kind of helped to bring it out and kind of build you up to it.
I think you can find yourself in those situations where if it's like tense or stressful or uncertain, there can be just some music playing incidentally in the background on a radio or someone's phone or whatever, and something about it does make you uneasy. You're just like, this is not the music that I want to hear right now. Like, this is not making me feel better. And I think that was a case of one of those pieces of music where they were kind of going into this serious situation and suddenly there's this blaring music, and like you say, it is kind of alarming in a way. So I think it's just one of those situations that, like you say, it works really nicely.
Definitely. It's one of the few times the music almost feels non-diegetic, doesn't it? It kind of feels like it's there to ratchet up the tension for us.
It's meta-diegetic.
There we go. There we go. Musical academia.
It's just some evidence that I've been to university.
Right. What else
Wanky
have we got
academic
here?
terms. You have a degree.
Gotta love them, really.
How would I know how to describe complex things if I couldn't use big words to say them? Which is why I use the word things.
Yeah, we keep it lowbrow on the podcast, do we? I hope we do.
Well, last week we had the thing about what was it? Bubbles Snatch.
Yeah. That was you who interpreted it that
That was
way.
a little moment that we had. That was our lowbrow moment.
It was kind of there for the taking, though, wasn't it? You couldn't really ignore it once I'd let it out the bag.
But anyway, back to the scene.
Back to the start. I mean, it's you could tell from the start that it was a pretty shit plan because they were clearly only doing this because Burrell had impulsively told them to.
Yeah, it's hard to blame them, really. I mean, it's just straight up not a good idea, not a good foundation for getting what they want.
Yeah, and
plays right into their hands, or right into the Barksdale's hands.
And they definitely did a good job with what they had to play with. It was possibly the best version of this plan. Ideally, they wouldn't have to come up with this plan at all because they don't want to do this, but they did fairly well. I mean, Carver, who's perhaps the most, the least on the ball of the detail, he saw it as a flimsy plan. They know that Orlando's been locked up. Like, isn't this clearly just a sting operation? And they had this kind of, a vague cover story that he was going to pay his lawyers. He was looking for some money to pay his lawyers, and are they really going to see past that? And they clearly didn't. So you could tell from the start that it was kind of doomed. And Greggs was very brave in that sense.
Although at the same time, it was also ended up as a not particularly good move for the Barksdale crew because, unbeknownst to them, they shot a cop, and obviously it prompts that quite famous reaction from Weebay that has been turned into a GIF 100 times.
Yeah, the reaction GIF. Yeah, it's a great look with that O mouth.
My face when turns out Shorty was a cop.
Yeah, Shorty was a cop. Yeah, God, can't wait to do next episode. So good.
Another audio-related spot. There's a really nice bit where when they find Greggs and they obviously leap out of their car, normally we're accustomed to all of the sort of like normal close miking and dubbing and boom miking to kind of have that, be able to hear what they say, basically. But then when they reach the car and they're kind of like shouting to their radios, all of the sound is suddenly drawn back. And we are kind of like, we're hearing it from far away. We sort of hear their shouts over the helicopter, and we hear kind of people calling to one another. We can't quite tell what they say. It really kind of reinforces how desperate and confusing the situation is. And I thought it was just a really nice touch to suddenly pull the sound of the people talking just suddenly way back, and you're just watching from a distance, kind of helpless.
And you've got this wall of sound.
Yeah, I mean, it really is. I mean, the most effective element in that entire scene for me is the audio. Just the whole audio and sound design for that scene is just astonishing, really. Especially with all the radio noises, and there's the helicopter, and then we have shots from the helicopter, and it reinforces that somewhat semi-documentary-esque feel that The Wire sometimes has.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, you got the sirens, the helicopter rotors are an important factor, and then you got, as you say, the radio chatter. You got the intense looks of dismay from everyone, the sound of the bin being kicked over by Carver. Like,
you've got Daniel's eyes, who always seem like they're about to pop out of his head when he gets scared.
Yeah. The shouting, the DEA pissed off about the money. It's all there, and it's all very intense. And when you put it all in one spot, I mean, it's impactful. Definitely is. And then you also got the helicopter thermal cameras, which is a nice kind of way to look down on the action, complete with all the the heads-up display.
Yeah, that kind of was it a FLIR display?
Is that what it's called? There we go. Yeah. So yeah, it's so intense. Did you catch Mcnulty's biggest ever British accent slip? By far. The biggest.
Is it the check the alleys?
That's not too bad, is it? That's close. But there's one scene where it's only about a minute before they jump out. I think it's he literally says this, speaking in a plain British accent. There's no attempt to hide it with American. I'm surprised they didn't go for a retake. But it's just, all units be advised, near side Warwick, near Longwood. It's just like completely British. It's worth checking out. It's by far his worst slip.
He was focusing so much on his kind of the rest of his acting that he forgot about the voice.
Yeah, so cares so much about Greggs genuinely that the American accent just didn't really matter at that point.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it was also nice how Sidney was catching a nap, despite Greggs being undercover and kind of on the line. Is continuity with his night shift from the previous day on Stakeout. So Carver had to do all the driving while he grabbed a nap.
Yeah, it was a nice little nod. So yeah, that's the episode.
And I look over and I see these black patterns and these uniform blue pants. I look up and it's Charlie Smoot. Charlie fucking Smoot. Yo, this guy's a legend. He looks down at me and he smiles, real quiet like. And he drops his cuffs. He says, "Here you go, Rook." That's all he says. "Here you go, Rook." And then he dropped the bracelets and walked away.
And I suppose we should move on to favourite scenes, although this one feels like a bit of a waste of time this week, seeing as we both know what the best scene is, and I think everyone who watches this episode knows what the best scene is.
Definitely.
And I think we said everything about it, so should we just go on to characters?
Sure, let's do it. You want to go first?
Well, I think it's important to make a shout out for Greg's, because it's a very kind of Greg's heavy episode, understandably. And also, I just feel like, because isn't Greg's the only character in The Wire that appears in every single episode?
I really don't want to say this because I sound like the biggest Wire nerd in the world, but kind of. She ties for the most appearances with Mcnulty.
Oh, okay.
I think they both have 56 out of 60 episodes. So she's not in every episode, but they both have an absence of 4. I think most of those are in the start of season 2, where she's kind of on the desk job, and she's not involved with the detail. But then, after that she comes back, because obviously Mcnulty's absences are season 4 ones, where he's on the beat, not really involved with much of the action. So
they both get sort of pulled back one way or another, just to kind of the sidelines.
Yeah. So but they both have the most appearances of any of the characters. Yeah, tied. Greg's, I put her down as well. It was kind of between Mcnulty and Greg's for me this week. It's odd because ashamedly, I don't think I'll ever put Greg as my favourite character in any episode, because she's never that. She's a good character, but she's never really a standout, is she? She's this.
No.
Do you know what I mean?
I think it's because her character is somewhat kind of. I don't know. I don't really know how to describe it. She seems very, very kind of serious all the time. So
yeah,
I don't know. It's kind of really hard to describe, but I know what you mean. She's just not really a standout character. I mean, it's a good performance and it's a very likable character, but at the same time, I think because Greg's the character is surrounded by so many other brilliant characters in the detail, like it's just hard to. There's no wonder that it's hard to stand out.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. She's a good police officer, but just hasn't quite got the X factor that we love that you have to have from one of your favourite characters. Like there's got to be something that sets him apart from any other character on telly, and that you can't quite see it with Greg's.
But in this episode, it does make a little bit of an episode to flesh her out a little bit more, and her relationship with Cheryl is kind of mentioned a fair bit throughout The Wire.
Yeah,
it does get quite a few little mentions. So.
Yeah,
so clearly it's something that they want to press to some extent. They obviously, the writers value it enough to keep bringing it up.
I think it's quite a good relationship, really. I mean, it's as far as TV breakups go, it's quite subtle. It's based on this really kind of looming sense of job dissatisfaction, or just it's hard to quite know what's underneath all their problems, but. There's clearly this police work doesn't quite sit with Cheryl properly, and they gradually drift. It's really, really tragic. Like it's not nice to think about. And they have those kind of really painful visits in season 5 when she goes to see I think Elijah, their son, isn't it?
Yeah.
So yeah, it's not good. We've had 3 episodes about Rules and Landsmen, haven't we? Which is
that's true. Yeah.
Been missing those guys. We also had no Poot or Bodie this episode, so there's been a few guys who've been off the radar. So there's been less of a roster to pick from.
Yeah. Okay, do you want to go for the title then?
Yeah, sure.
The Cost.
Yeah.
Again, it's another classic kind of very sweeping title, so it covers many things. I mean, you can talk about many costs that are endured in this episode. The most obvious one, obviously, being Burrell's decision to go for buy bust, and the cost ends up being Greg's being in hospital.
Yeah. I mean, if you take the cost to mean consequence, then The Wire is riddled with that. That's kind of what The Wire is. So.
Yeah, I mean, it's easy to kind of pick out plenty. But I guess you could go for more, financial or sort of material cost if you wanted to go for that. You can point to slightly more specific examples, I think. So, I don't know, for example, it costs Mcnulty to get those police officers to do the stakeout for him. So it costs him all that beer in order for them to do it.
Yeah.
Or Donette is talking to D'Angelo about all of the things that they're going to need to buy, and he's obviously thinking about the cost of that. And that's kind of what prompts him to kind of walk out in a way. There
was that 5K ransom that was batted about this episode as well, which was Omar's cost for kind of amnesty.
Yeah, that's right.
Then we have McNulty paying the cost for taking his foot off the parenting. Taking his foot off the pedal with the parenting anyway. With the judge, the DEA losing his money in the bust. So I mean, there's a fair few, isn't there? But
again, it's another kind of it's another sort of wide one that you can point a lot of things at. So rather than trying to list them all off, I guess we could say that you at home can think about what you considered the cost to be in this episode. We'll leave it to the audience.
There's no wrong answer.
And the epigraph, obviously, Greg's telling her story about what made her want to be a cop. Which again is another sort of Greg's character fleshing out moment, and a nice little... Another one of those moments where someone's telling a story and they do a very, very slow zoom on their face as they're telling it.
Yeah.
Quite a few moments like that.
Yeah, I mean, one of the weaker ones, I guess it's more of a foreshadowing, isn't it? Greg's is metaphorically dropping the bracelets as she gets shot, she's losing that police tie. Well, we don't know. We know she goes back quite deep into the police, but for a first-time viewer, I think most people assume she dies, actually, don't they? Because they don't make it clear.
It does feel like it, yeah. I mean, it's a massive cliffhanger, but something about it feels very final.
Yeah. So it's sad stuff, but it hasn't really got that much bearing on the actual show, has it? It's not a big statement about The Wire.
It's quite an unusual epigraph, I think.
Yeah.
Normally they try to sort of be like, sort of a little bit more whimsical or, expressing some message about the show, but this one just is kind of an excerpt from the story that Greg's is telling, and it happens to be Greg's that is the kind of the subject of great cost in this episode, so that's about it, really.
Yeah, same as last week. Last week was quite focused on... I mean, actually, it's better than last week's. Last week's was a bit just nothing. But yeah, it doesn't really have that many kind of cross layer ties, as you say. So
that's it for episode 10.
There we go.
The cost. And we're sort of building very slowly towards the very end of this season, which is unbelievable. I can't believe how far we've come already.
We have 3 episodes left. What the hell happened?
But then we get to move on to season 2, which is even better, in my opinion.
Yeah, definitely. Is 1 the weakest season for you?
Yeah, I suppose so. I do really, really like it. I have a bit of a soft spot for it, but it's hard to kind of pick it over the other seasons because they're so much more satisfying.
Definitely, I completely agree.
I mean, 4 and 2, they're the kind of the killers for me. They are kind of standout seasons.
Yeah, I can't agree with you more there. For me, 2, 4, and 5, and then 1 and 3 are slightly underneath. But yeah, it's very, very good, but you can't really put it above the other 4 by any means for me. Because as you say, it is just the prelude to The Wire, isn't it, almost? And it's hard to put a prelude kind of at the top of a list, unless it's a chronological list. So...
Right, well, next week we'll be with episode 11, and we'll be sort of working our way closer to the end of the season and talking about how it all builds up to the finale. And we'll be keeping you up to date with any more information and about when the episode's being released up on caughtonthewire.wordpress.com. And you can feel free to send us any emails or comments at caughtonthewire@gmail.com. And until then, we shall bid you farewell.
What you know about Baltimore? What you know about Baltimore? Baltimore. What you know about Baltimore? What you know about Baltimore?